Welcome to the Hunchcast, where we discuss all things the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Leslie, and today we're discussing books 8 and 9 of Victor Hugo's Notre-Dame de Paris, or The Hunchback of Notre Dame if you live in the English-speaking world.
And I gotta tell you, Leslie, today's episode is gonna be an exciting one. We're gonna have torture, daring rescues, bread, and the uselessness of God.
Yes, far-off places, daring sword fights, magic spells, a prince and disguise, all of this and more after these messages. Pat, I have a topic to propose for today's Minute of History. I'm curious, what did this novel's first readers think of it? And what did subsequent readers think of it as it started getting translated into other languages?
Initially, it was not super successful. Sales were modest, and a lot of the reviews were mediocre to bad.
Well, that's consistent with a lot of the novels we think of as classics today. I just finished reading Wuthering Heights by Charlotte Bronte. That book was largely obscure while the author was alive. It was only after her death that that book was revisited and became known as the triumph that it is today.
And in the case of Notre-Dame de Paris, it took like a year for people to like it. His friends really liked the novel at first, but he certainly had his fair share of haters. The first of these was the wife of Charles Gozlan, his publisher, who got mad at her husband. Why would you publish such a boring book about architecture? Don't tell me you paid the guy in advance. And he did pay Hugo in advance. A big complaint from a lot of readers was that it was unrealistic. You're telling me a hunchback rang the bells and jumped around? No way. I would say the biggest hater of the novel early on was the German poet Johann von Goethe, the guy who wrote Faust and The Sorcerer's Apprentice and Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship.
That's really interesting, considering that Dr. Faust was an inspiration for Claude Frollo, and we ourselves have compared him to Dr. Faust a couple times on this podcast.
And some people make the argument that a character from Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship inspires Esmeralda, the Romani character Mignon. Goethe was actually a huge fan of Hugo's early poetry, but by the 1830s, he considered Victor Hugo to have sold out. He's writing all of these plays and novels purely for the money. He's sold out, he's no good. In fact, Notre-Dame de Paris is the most abominable book ever written.
Well, you know what? Goethe's dead, so there.
But within a year, the novel was really well regarded. We saw the 1832 edition with some extra chapters. There were adaptations, operas, plays, and parodies all over Europe. However, while the novel's reception was growing, Hugo's personal reception only got worse. People would even make fun of Hugo's appearance.
Well, that makes sense. You had made the argument that Quasimodo was inspired, at least in part, by Hugo's own self-image. You know, as a kid, he was bullied for having too large of a head before he became a Don Juan with the ladies. So that's a little ironic and hypocritical that he would have been really offended that his personal image was attacked after he released this book.
So while Hugo was living in exile for his political views, the German poet Heinrich Heine spread a rumor that Hugo was a hunchback. He was mad, so he met up with his publisher, climbed up to the top of a cliff, stripped naked, and asked his publisher, is this the body of a hunchback?
Normalize stripping yourself butt naked in front of your boss.
Listen, it's not harassment if it's for PR.
I think Victor Hugo needs to publish an apology video, with a little ukulele. I am so sorry that I stripped myself naked in front of my boss. Like many men, I am just now learning the definition of workplace harassment. This is new to me. I'm here to listen.
What do you mean workplace harassment? His publisher was fine with it.
Oh my gosh, he was?
Yeah, his publisher said, my God, if Hugo wasn't meant to be a poet and a writer, he should have made a living as an artist model.
I bet that moment awakened some things in Victor Hugo's publisher. On that hunchtacular note, we are going to jump back into the novel.
And you know what? It has been far too long since we had an elaborate trial scene.
There are 3 trials in this novel. Would you argue that each is less fair than the last?
Each becomes more and more ridiculous as they increase in their level of professionalism. First you have all of the homeless people and vagabonds in the Court of Miracles basically trying to lynch Gringoire, but at least the beggars gave Gringoire a chance to prove that he could join their society.
And at least they had a semi-arguable reason for trying to hang him. He trespassed on their secret lair. Maybe he had connections with the police.
And more importantly, he wrote a boring play. The greatest crime of all.
Absolutely.
And you got Quasimodo's trial, where you have the deaf on trial before the deaf. And the trial of Esmeralda for supposedly stabbing Captain Phoebus is going to appear to be more professional. Everyone is able to do their job properly, but the law itself is going to be the true farce here. So the first witness that is called to the stand is the owner of the inn, La Fallardelle.
Yes, the woman who is described as being an old hag and has cat-like whiskers. Meow.
Okay, talk bad about her appearance all you want.
I'm not talking bad about her appearance. I'm using Victor Hugo's exact verbiage.
Well, the verbiage is important.
Meow.
Because La Fallardelle is very concerned over how people describe her establishment. Hey, in the deposition, my establishment was called a stinking hovel. Can we correct that from the record? Her deposition is all, oh yeah, there was this witch conspiring with the devil, and she killed the captain. It was terrible. I literally saw the devil right there. Anyway, what's going on with this stinking hovel terminology?
She also says at one point that when she went upstairs, found Phoebus covered in blood, and Esmeralda passed out, her very first thought was, it'll take me 2 weeks to get the floor clean again. So, number 1, I question her definition of the word clean. Number 2, I completely understand. She is concerned about the bottom line. No one is going to want to rent out a room with blood soaked into the floor.
How are you cleaning out blood back then? There's no hydrogen peroxide. I bet my boots La Fallardelle was just going to throw a rug down. So after seeing this horrible murder and the devil and witchcraft and the soldiers leave, La Fallardelle is always focused on that bag. So she goes to get the money that Phoebus had given her. And again, this was money that Phoebus got from Claude Frollo because Phoebus is broke.
Extremely. Claude Frollo seems to be the only person in this novel who has any money.
Why does he have so much money? He's always throwing bags of coins at Jehan. He's able to teach Quasimodo and teach Gringoire. He's got to have some kind of side hustle.
Remember, he's friends with the king. The king is probably covering his expenses.
This is a multi-level marketing scheme. I'll make gold by quote-unquote teaching people how to synthesize it with magic. Oh my god.
While also conspiring with the law to hang other people for witchcraft. Which I myself am totally not doing, by the way.
This just in. Pot calls kettle black. So while La Fallardelle is looking for this coin that Phoebus gave her, she finds that the coin has been replaced by a withered leaf, which it's totally not that I either lost the coin or somebody stole it. The fact that I found a leaf in place of the crown piece that Phoebus gave me, that's obviously a sign of witchcraft. So not only was Esmeralda a witch who enchanted Phoebus and killed her and danced with the devil and also a goat was there, I lost my dollar.
And while all this is going on, Esmeralda is miserable. At this point, she doesn't care about her own life at all. She implores all of the judges on the dais, I don't care if you kill me. Just tell me, is Phoebus alive?
And the judges reply, oh, he's dying.
I can't emphasize enough, Esmeralda is not being tried for attempted murder. She is being tried for murder of a man who isn't dead yet. And this is not a logical fallacy on Victor Hugo's part. This is Hugo demonstrating how unfair and illogical the medieval justice system was. You're being sentenced to death for murdering a guy who is alive. That doesn't make any sense. And it's supposed to not make any sense. Listener, this is supposed to make your blood boil.
Well, even if Esmeralda is able to prove that she is innocent, and of course she doesn't have a lawyer, even if you can prove that you're innocent of murder, well, there's also witchcraft going on.
And by the way, this isn't just Esmeralda's trial. This is also Djali's trial. Her goat is also being tried for witchcraft. And one of the judges says the goat is clearly possessed by some demon because she can count to 10 with her hoof and arrange blocks. And if an exorcism doesn't drive the demon out, they'll execute the animal. And again, trials in the Middle Ages were public events. Pierre Gringoire is there, not to support Esmeralda, to support Djali. Victor Hugo writes that when Gringoire heard that there is a possibility Djali will be executed, he, quote, broke out in a cold sweat.
My wife is being tried for a crime she did not commit. I sleep. Her pet is also there? That's real stuff. I'm not playing anymore.
So to demonstrate that Djali is possessed by a demon, the judges make Djali perform some of the tricks Esmeralda has taught her. Oh, what time is it? What month of the year is it? Do an impression of this noble. And Gringoire cries out, "Don't you see? She knows not what she does." This is a very sad, infuriating scene. That part did make me laugh out loud in a quiet room. Because Gringoire's wife goes on trial, and he goes, "Oh, y'all hear something? I don't know." But the goat goes on trial, and he's foaming at the mouth like an angry Wojak.
I can definitely see why trials are not public events these days.
But hey, this may be a controversial opinion. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that Djali is also on trial. I think if we tried animals the way we tried people, far fewer animals would be put down, at least in our country. Looking at you, Christy Gnome. And throughout this whole trial, Esmeralda consistently denies that she stabbed Phoebus. And this is not to preserve her own life. I mean, Hugo makes it very clear Esmeralda does not care whether she survives this. She only cares about Phoebus. She keeps denying hurting him because she doesn't want to die knowing that he thinks she hurt him. That's all she cares about. And she keeps saying, "Oh, it wasn't me, it was the priest, it was the priest." And these men, these judges who are in charge of trying and sentencing her, they heard the innkeeper's testimony. They know that there was a cloaked figure who jumped out the window and disappeared into the night immediately after the murder in air quotes, Phoebus is still alive, immediately after the stabbing, rather, took place. They don't even consider that, oh, maybe this cloaked man, maybe he is the real murderer. They believe, just like Phoebus, that this cloaked figure was the goblin monk, that night-prowling cryptid, and that Esmeralda conspired with him to commit the crime. So no one has thought, even for a moment, oh, maybe that guy did it. No, they say, oh, well, that clearly was the goblin monk, and Esmeralda clearly conspired with him. And then they finally say, well, if you won't confess, we will torture it out of you. And Jacques Charmolue, remember him, listener? He's the guy who met with Claude Frollo in the previous book to orchestrate Esmeralda's arrest. He takes Esmeralda out of the hall, and one of the judges says, "What a strange and bothersome girl to bring the torture on herself when we ought to be at supper." The key word there is bring the torture on herself. Esmeralda never stood a chance in this trial. That line tells you everything you need to know about Esmeralda's chances in this trial. If she's crying and she's trying to argue that she's innocent, well, she's clearly trying to waste our time. You know, we're not going to listen to anything that comes out of her mouth because we've already decided that she is guilty. In our justice system, we have the concept of you're innocent until you're proven guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt. That is not a principle at play in this particular justice system, and I really commend Hugo for resisting the temptation to paint the Middle Ages as this beautiful, rosy, romantic time of knights and keeps and castles and princesses. He puts the shortcomings of the Middle Ages on shameful display.
Esmeralda is taken to a dungeon called the Chamber of the Question, Probably because it provides an answer. Not necessarily the right answer, but an answer. People just confess in order to stop the pain. Now, when it comes to torture in the Middle Ages, there's a lot of exaggeration. The torture device that Esmeralda is subjected to, which is called the boot, is a real device. And it's a terrible, terrible thing. Basically, you're forced to put your foot into a large metal boot contraption, and the torturer will tighten the boot more and more and more until your foot is crushed in a vice. And not only is this incredibly painful, this is the worst possible scenario for Esmeralda, who is a dancer. She's on her feet all day.
So even if she does, by some miracle, manage to prove her innocence and be set free, she can't really dance ever again.
And the pain is so intense. Esmeralda is screaming. And in order to get the pain to end, not only does she confess to the murder of Phoebus, but also to all of the insane accusations of witchcraft and colluding with the devil and the goat and the goblin monk.
This reminds me of the scene in the Quentin Tarantino movie Reservoir Dogs, where Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi are beating up a police officer, and Chris Penn walks in and says, "Why are you beating up on this cop?" And Steve Buscemi says, "Well, if we beat up on him enough, he'll probably give us some information." And Chris Penn says, "Yeah, if you beat up on him enough, he'll tell you he started the Chicago fire. You know, if you push someone beyond their limits, they will tell you whatever you want to hear just to get the pain to stop, even if it isn't true."
Pain. I think we're overreacting, Leslie. I think we need to tone it down a bit, right? Because take a look at what Jacques Charmilou says after the confession and the horrible, violent torture. "It is a consolation, gentlemen, and the girl will bear witness that we have shown her the greatest mercy."
This is virtue signaling at its finest. Oh, look at us. Look at how great we are. Look at how fair and just. Let's pat ourselves on the back and have champagne and eat truffles and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, listener, if that doesn't make your blood boil, I don't know what will.
Probably this next bit. The judges read out her sentence, which has 3 phases. First, she has to pay a fine in reparation of the crimes committed. With what money? I don't know. Coins that people threw into her tambourine, I guess. She has to make a formal apology in front of Notre Dame and beg for forgiveness and salvation. And then she's going to be executed in the Place de Grève.
Wait. So she's being executed and she has to pay a fine in reparation of the crime she didn't commit, that nobody committed because she was charged with murdering a man who's alive? Her death isn't reparation enough?
Yes.
You know what? I was born in the right generation. I really was.
The part I found the most infuriating is that Esmeralda's sentence is not even pronounced in a language she can understand at first. It's initially read in Latin. And this is a key bit of commentary on Hugo's part. And I find it very surprising given that at the time, he's still, at least tangentially, identified as a Catholic. And a big Protestant criticism of the Catholic Church is that so much of the homilies and church services are read in Latin, and people don't speak Latin. Well, in the Middle Ages, not only is church in Latin, but the court system is often in Latin, and the university system is too. It's completely inaccessible and alien to ordinary people.
No wonder Jehan doesn't go to class. Claude, why would I go to class? I can't even understand what they're saying.
No one has talked like that in 1,000 years.
Some time passes. We don't know how much time. Esmeralda doesn't know how much time. Until the day of her execution, she is held in a prison cell underneath the Palace of Justice. And that metaphor is very important. She literally has the Palace of Justice over her head. There is no window or any source of light in this cell, so she has no way of telling what time of day it is, how many days have passed, what her surroundings look like. The sun is gone from her life, both literally and metaphorically, the metaphor being that she believes Phoebus, her sun god, is dying. Hugo writes that there are some bugs down there with her, and sometimes Esmeralda feels them crawling over her, but again, she can't see them, and she can't run away from them because she is chained by her wrists and her ankles. She hasn't slept at all. Every so often, the jailer throws bread down a trapdoor for her, but she doesn't eat it because how could she? She can't see it. She doesn't know what or where it is. And because Esmeralda is running on no sleep, no food, no light, no sense of time, she isn't all there mentally. Her brain is sort of falling apart at the seams. She doesn't remember where she is. She doesn't remember why she's there. Hugo writes, "Never had a living creature been plunged so deeply into nothingness." Bottom line, Esmeralda is in hell.
One day, there's finally a little bit of light. She opens her eyes and there's a lantern sitting on the floor of her cell, illuminating a figure completely covered in a long black cloak, which is a terrifying image. It's like the Grim Reaper has come to visit her.
Yeah, very Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come from A Christmas Carol.
Ooh. And for several minutes, the figure just stands there, motionless, and Esmeralda is too afraid to speak. I don't blame her.
Every time I imagine this scene, I get goosebumps. Imagine this poor, ragged girl chained up. She hasn't seen any light or eaten any food in who knows how many days, just staring at this motionless black cloak for minutes. This is not a horror novel necessarily, but it does have horrifying elements and horrifying scenes. This is definitely one of them. So far, I think this is the scariest scene in the novel.
Eventually, Esmeralda finds the courage to speak and ask this phantom who he is. He says that he is a priest and that she is going to die tomorrow. The figure says, "Come with me," and pulls down his hood to reveal his identity. None other than Claude Frollo.
Dun, dun, dun!
Esmeralda is horrified and outraged at the same time. "Why do you hate me so?" And Claude Frollo is offended by this accusation. He says, "I love you."
Could have fooled me.
And this is the most bewildering thing Esmeralda could possibly hear in this moment. This is the man who has stalked her, harassed her, who tried to kill her lover. "What kind of love can you feel?" Esmeralda asks. And Frollo replies, "The love of the damned," which is very emo.
Yeah, what, is he listening to Fall Out Boy in his tower? While he's huddled under his books and not feeling a woman's touch, he's just, headbanging to FOB.
He must be, because he starts pouring out his soul to Esmeralda. He begins, "Before I saw you, I was happy." And Esmeralda says, "Oh, me too."
Yeah, look, this is finally something we have in common.
No. Frollo immediately nips that in the bud and says, "Don't interrupt me." And once again, a man is going to talk at Esmeralda.
That's the story of her life. That's all that's been happening to her this whole novel. People talking at her.
Isn't that just Frollo in a nutshell?
Of course, he claims to be in love with her, but how can he? He doesn't know anything about her because he never lets her talk. Because if she talks, she can express her personality. And he refuses to let her be anything but what his imagination has already decided she is, which is a witch, an enchantress, a sorceress who has placed a spell on him.
And also is really hot. Both of those can exist at the same time in Frollo's logic.
So just like Pierre Gringoire did to Esmeralda on their wedding night, Claude Frollo starts talking at Esmeralda. Has not been invited to at all. Just starts talking at her. Tells her his whole life story. He used to avoid women. He directed all of his affections toward knowledge. He says something really interesting here that I want to unpack. He says, "Science was everything to me. It was a sister, and a sister was enough for me." It's interesting that he refers to science as a sister rather than a brother, because Claude Frollo has a brother, Jehan, and Jehan has done nothing but disappoint him, because Jehan is real. He is a real person with real flaws. And as an intellectual, Claude Frollo can only live in the world of ideas. That's why he's not letting Esmeralda speak, because if she talks and expresses her personality, that will contradict his idea of her. Just like Jehan has contradicted Claude Frollo's idea of what a brother and a good sibling is supposed to be. Claude Frollo is talking about how successful he was in avoiding women. This is the first time I've ever heard of a man bragging about never having felt a woman's touch. Oh yeah, I've never interacted with a woman before. Aren't I so cool? No, that's just weird. And unlike Sir Galahad the Chaste, he's not avoiding women for any noble reason. He's avoiding women because he hates them. And he tells Esmeralda, "Alas, if victory has not remained mine, it is God's fault for making man equal in strength to the demon." So, number one, again, this is an idea we discussed in the previous episode, listener. Claude Frollo wants to externalize all of his problems. Oh, it's not my fault for lusting after women. It is God's fault for making man equal in strength to the demon. And this is paraphrased in Disney's animated adaptation of this book, in Claude Frollo's solo Hellfire, in which Tony J just fabulously sings, "It's not my fault, yet in God's plan he made the devil so much stronger than a man." And he claims that God is the one who did this. I'm not so sure, because in the Christian Bible, in the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 29, Jesus Christ himself says, "If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you." So if you see a hot woman and you're thinking of sinning, if you're lusting after her, pluck out your eyes. Don't make her do anything. Don't make her cover up. Pluck out your eyes and throw it away. And then Claude Frollo recounts the day he first saw Esmeralda. And he's using a lot of very pretty, flattering words here. He calls Esmeralda a sight not made for human eyes, a creature so beautiful that God would have preferred her to the Virgin. Two things here. Number one, at no point does he call Esmeralda a person. And there again we see that thread of Esmeralda being objectified. Taken out of context, these are very pretty words that Claude Frollo is saying to Esmeralda. And if someone said them to me, if someone called me a creature so beautiful God would have preferred me to the Virgin, I'd probably be flattered. But that's all they are. They're just words. I like to revisit the book All About Love by the late writer and activist Bell Hooks. She defines love not as a noun, but as a verb. As a series of actions, as choices that you have to make every single day, not as feelings. So by that definition, if you think someone is the most beautiful person in the world, and they're always on your mind, and your heart beats a little faster around them, but you treat them like crap, you do not love that person. Because that's how Hooks defines love, as the way you treat someone. So let's see if the way Claude Frollo treats Esmeralda holds up to Bell Hooks' definition of love. During this scene, Claude Frollo confesses to three things. Number one, he says, "I obtained an ordinance forbidding you to appear in the precincts of our church." So, limiting her ability to make money by restricting the places where she can dance. Two, he orchestrated her kidnapping, and this is where we learn that he was the second man with Quasimodo the night of the Feast of Fools in Book 2, when Esmeralda was almost abducted off the street. And three, he confesses that he went to the law and conspired with the officials to have her arrested. He also stabbed the man Esmeralda is in love with and framed her for the crime. And even before all of this happened, he scowled at her and called her a witch every time he ran into her in public. So, Patrick, Bell Hooks defines love as the way you treat somebody. Does Claude Frollo, by that definition, love Esmeralda?
Not in the slightest. Except perhaps with the love of the damned. And then Frollo's going back to the old well of, this is all fate's fault. This is all destiny's fault. Alas, alas, he says, it was fate that caught you and threw you among the terrible gears of the machine that I had secretly constructed.
Oh my gosh, the mental gymnastics he performs to absolve himself is outrageous. Oh, yeah, I'm the one who orchestrated your execution and tried to kidnap you and set the trap, blah, 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 blah. Fate threw you into the trap. It's not my fault.
Like, talk about cognitive dissonance here. I've gone so far out of love for you. Isn't that romantic? Oh, but also, I didn't do any of it. Fate did it. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't be a victim of fate while also having a secret machine that you constructed that is putting you into your trap. He believes both positions at once. This guy is supposedly the greatest intellectual ever, but he's really dumb. And imagine being Esmeralda here. You are locked in a horrible sensory deprivation chamber, starving, grieving, covered in bugs and animals for weeks. And some guy finally shows up and tells you stuff like, you think you are miserable? You don't know what misery is.
Okay, let's review. Esmeralda was nearly abducted off the street. She saw the man who she thought was the love of her life stabbed, and then she was told that that man was dying. She was tried, tortured, and sentenced for a crime she didn't commit. She was told she will be executed tomorrow. She's been living in this cell with no light, no water, no food, no sense of time. She has no family to rely on or help her or advocate for her rights, not that she has any. What's happened to Frollo? Nothing. Except the consequences of his own actions. That's the misery Esmeralda is dealing with was inflicted upon her by others. But the misery Claude Frollo is dealing with was self-inflicted. And he can't put two and two together and realize that.
Frollo's gone through plenty in his life. He's bald. She doesn't know what that's like.
I know, I bet she has beautiful hair. Maybe she's born with it, maybe it's Maybelline. I imagine it's very painful to be attracted to a woman for the very first time after living a celibate life. That was Frollo's choice. It was not Esmeralda's choice to be nearly abducted off the street and executed for a crime she did not commit. Just to get serious here for a moment, I imagine that this scene and these words Claude Frollo is saying to Esmeralda, I imagine it resonates with a lot of survivors of domestic violence in a very, very disturbing way. You know, when the person who is responsible for your physical, mental, emotional, and financial turmoil turns around and says, oh, you think I like doing this to you? You made me do this. I'm suffering just as much as you are. I'm the real victim here. I bet that this is very disturbing to people who have lived through that.
He keeps playing the victim, which is a classic abuser tactic. And he's so mad that Esmeralda doesn't appreciate a true intellectual and a suffering soul such as him, but rather this empty-headed Phoebus, to see her in love with a soldier's uniform and to have nothing to offer her but the wretched cassock, which to her was the object of fear and disgust. Newsflash, buddy, Esmeralda is not disgusted and afraid of you because you have a creepy black cloak. She's afraid of you because you scowl at her, curse her, and ruin her life.
He thinks Esmeralda is so much more shallow than she actually is. And yeah, Esmeralda likes hot guys. We know that. She wants a knight in shining armor. But she's not afraid of Claude Frollo because he's a priest. She's afraid of him because he hasn't ever said a kind word to her.
Am I wrong to call Claude Frollo an incel? Like, is he the first incel in literature? I mean, first of all, he's always in his cell in Notre Dame. Second, he matches the profile perfectly. He's lusting after women while also hating them. He's got that whole Madonna horror complex going on.
Right.
Someone should get this guy on Reddit.
So this whole lecture culminates in Claude Frollo offering to smuggle Esmeralda out of the dungeon and flee Paris with her so she can avoid execution. He says, "We would seek that spot on earth where there are the most trees, the most sunshine, and the most azure sky." It sounds like he's describing Wyoming. Anyway, sounds like his plan is to take her to some rural area where they can live out their lives as peasants, and she can essentially be his sex slave, to put it in the most vulgar terms. So he has step 1. Step 1, smuggle Esmeralda out of the dungeon. He has step 10, be peasants and work the land and live under a big, beautiful sky. What about steps 2 through 9? How is he going to get her to Wyoming? How is he going to pay for their life? Is he planning on using alchemy to turn light into gold and living off of that?
I think Claude Frollo was planning to be the original deadbeat cryptocurrency boyfriend. It's like, what do you mean get a job, babe? I'm gonna make it big with Flipcoin.
Yeah, don't you worry, babe. Flipcoin is about to explode in value, and we're gonna be millionaires, and we're gonna buy 40 acres in Wyoming. Yeah, Frollo's plan here kind of reminds me of that episode of South Park with the underwear gnomes. How their plan was, step 1, steal the underwear. Step 2, step 3, profit. Step 1, smuggle Esmeralda out of the dungeon. Step 2, step 3, she falls in love with me. And of course, Esmeralda doesn't even consider Claude Frollo's offer. Why would she subject herself to a life with this guy who just confessed to being responsible for all of the pain and suffering that she has been through in the last couple months? She asks Claude Frollo where Phoebus is, and Frollo replies, "He is dead." And those words infuse Esmeralda's strength back into her, and she, quote, rushed on him like an enraged tigress and thrust him toward the steps with supernatural force. "Begone, monster! Begone, murderer! Leave me to die. May both our blood mark your brow with an everlasting stain. Nothing will bring us together." And Claude Frollo leaves. And I read this whole quote because, as I mentioned in our previous episode, for years I have been told by people who have read this novel that Victor Hugo's Esmeralda, the original incarnation of this character, is a stupid, weak damsel in distress. And to that I say, did we read the same book? Would a stupid, weak damsel in distress throw a murderer over twice her age to the ground and say, "May both our blood mark your brow with an everlasting stain"? That is the hardest line I've ever heard. I'm 26. I'm a full-time writer. I couldn't do that. I couldn't think of that line. Esmeralda's 16. She doesn't think twice about it.
Oh, and by the way, Phoebus isn't dead. He's got a little scratch and a sling on his arm, but he's doing pretty well.
Not only is Esmeralda being executed for a crime she did not commit, she is being executed for a crime that never happened. She is being executed for murder, not attempted murder. Murder, plain and simple, but the victim is alive. And Victor Hugo wants us to be appalled by the ridiculousness of this. He writes, "Justice in these days cared little about propriety and accuracy in a criminal process, provided that the accused was hung." So, even if the judges knew that Esmeralda was innocent, they wouldn't care. They want her to be hung anyway. Just throw her on the gallows so we can be done with this. The Sopranos is on at 8 o'clock.
I don't feel like changing the paperwork. And to make matters worse, Phoebus knows his murder trial is taking place, but he doesn't feel the need to show up and clarify that, hey, this was all a big misunderstanding, I am alive, because he thinks it would be embarrassing. He thinks people are going to make fun of him.
"Oh, Phoebus, you can't even die properly, you loser."
He goes right from the surgeons back to Fleur-de-Lis's apartment.
I don't blame him. It's a beautiful apartment.
Phoebus is turning over a new leaf. He's now completely over Esmeralda and in love with Fleur again.
Yeah, he remembered that Fleur-de-Lis is rich, so he's gone back to her. And Fleur and Phoebus are hanging out on the balcony, exchanging sweet nothings as couples do, watching the people of Paris gather in the Place de Grève for the hanging of a witch. And Hugo notes, interestingly, that in this crowd, there were more women than men.
That's a theme I've noticed throughout the book. Whenever there's a big crowd scene, I definitely noticed this during the Festival of Fools. I noticed it during Quasimodo's torture in the square, and it's also here as well.
I find it interesting that women, at least in the world of this novel, are more inclined to witness the suffering of another woman. Why do you think that is?
Maybe it's jealousy. The most beautiful woman in Paris is getting her comeuppance.
That's one theory. I was thinking it's possibly out of self-preservation. They think, oh, if I don't go to cheer on the burning of a witch, I might be thought of as a witch myself. People might say, oh, why weren't you there? Why weren't you cheering on the witch's burning? Are you a witch?
So Esmeralda is brought into the square. She's humiliated. She's lost so much of her gaiety in life. She's dressed in a slip, which is just one big rag. Her hands are bound, her hair falls loose over her shoulders, and there's a noose tied around her neck. The only bit of her old personality you can really see is that she's still wearing her amulet.
And my interpretation of this choice was, even though Esmeralda knows this is her last day on Earth, she still hasn't given up on the possibility of finding her parents. Little orphan Annie, eat your heart out.
Oh, and by the way, the goat's there too.
And Phoebus and Fleur, who are ogling each other with one eye and looking upon this scene with the other, they both recognize Esmeralda. And Phoebus goes pale. Oh my gosh, that's the girl I had a rendezvous with. She is being killed because the powers that be think I'm dead. And he is sick with this knowledge. He tries to turn around and go back inside the apartment so he doesn't have to watch. But Fleur, very curiously, forces him to stay. She says, oh no, let us look on until it is over. And she casts on him, Hugo writes, a penetrating look of mistrust. Now, I could be completely wrong here. My interpretation of this scene is that Fleur remembers that Esmeralda was in love with Phoebus, and in this moment, she knows Phoebus was involved with Esmeralda. She knows they met up behind her back. And as punishment for his infidelity, she is forcing him to watch her die. You see what happens when you turn your back on me? You see what happens when you cheat on me? I am going to make you watch the girl you met up with behind my back get killed. And maybe that'll teach you to never do this again. Maybe that's why her name is Fleur. Fleur meaning flower. Like that iconic line from Shakespeare's Macbeth, look like the innocent flower, be the serpent underneath it. That very much applies to Fleur-de-Lis in this moment. Assuming that Victor Hugo even read Macbeth or saw a performance of it. I guess that's a question for you, Hunchback historian. Did he?
Not for nothing, but he did.
Nice.
In the preface to his play Cromwell, which is a lot more famous than his play Cromwell, it's kind of a manifesto of the Romantic movement, Macbeth does come up when Hugo talks about his admiration for Shakespeare and how Shakespeare is a writer that the French should emulate rather than hate, as Voltaire did. And more poignantly, while writing Notre-Dame de Paris, Hugo had a print of the three witches from Macbeth in his study. Macbeth was on the mind, even if Hugo only read it in translation or just had his friends tell him what the plot was about. Victor Hugo could not speak English, even when he lived in an English-speaking country for 20 years.
And Hugo writes of this scene, many of the mob, and of the hardest-hearted too, on seeing her, Esmeralda, so beautiful and so overwhelmed, were moved by pity. I hate the mob. I hate them. They only have pity for a person sentenced to public execution when they notice that that person is pretty. They are unable to comprehend a situation beyond the surface level.
And as Esmeralda is brought in front of the doors of Notre Dame to do penance, the rope trailing behind her neck looks like a snake following her.
The implication, of course, being that she is about to be devoured.
I also saw it as another biblical reference, right? The snake that tempts Eve and brings her to her doom in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, and in that way, it was Esmeralda giving in to her temptation to meet Phoebus at this inn that is leading now to her doom.
The doors of the church open. A huge procession emerges, chanting. Frollo is among them. He was so pale that some in the crowd thought he must be one of the marble bishops.
And of course, that is another stitch in this thread Victor Hugo is pulling throughout the novel, that Claude Frollo is not human, or at least he is rejecting his humanity. He is often described as being very much like a statue.
Once again, Frollo offers himself to Esmeralda, and even in this moment, she chooses to die rather than give in to his hateful lust. And like any guy who gets rejected by a girl and says, "Oh, she was ugly anyway, I never liked her," Frollo says, "Well, die then," and walks away. He is not even willing to watch the execution that he is responsible for.
Yeah, that's very, very important. He does not watch Esmeralda get executed.
Always fleeing the consequences of his actions.
So with that, Esmeralda is led toward the pillory, and who does she catch a glimpse of but Phoebus? Oh my goodness, the man who she believed up until this point was dead, because everyone has told her so. The man who she believes is in love with her. Surely he will intervene and save her and clear up this whole misunderstanding. No, and don't call me Shirley. She cries out for him desperately, but without him even saying a word, he and Fleur-de-Lis turn their back on her and go inside. And I saw this as a very interesting parallel with the scene in Book 6, where Quasimodo was on the pillory. He thought Claude Frollo was going to help him, and without saying a word, Claude Frollo turned around and left.
All hope is lost. The execution seems to be going through, but up above in the upper gallery of the cathedral, there's another person watching Esmeralda.
Who is it?
Well, just like Claude Frollo, this person could be easily mistaken for one of the statues. It is Quasimodo. But he's not just here to watch the execution, he has a plan. Quasimodo has tied a knotted rope to one of the small pillars on the gallery, and he takes this rope, jumps down the facade of Notre Dame, and remember, he is a master at this. He has been climbing and jumping around the cathedral his entire life, like a lizard or a mountain goat.
Well, what else was he supposed to do? Claude Frollo never gave him an iPad.
Well, all that exercise has paid off. Quasimodo leaps down, and he knocks over the executioner's assistants, grabs Esmeralda with one arm, jumps to the entrance of Notre Dame, holds her over his head, and yells, "Sanctuary! Sanctuary!"
Sanctuary!
Now, Patrick, what is sanctuary? Why this word? What does it allude to?
Sanctuary is a medieval concept that stated when you were within the walls of Notre Dame or any other church, a prisoner was free from public prosecution. But the second you step outside, the justice system could take you over. The mob cheers for Quasimodo. Hugo writes, "At that moment, Quasimodo was really beautiful. Yes, he was beautiful. He, that orphan, that foundling, that outcast, he felt himself august and strong. He looked in the face of that society from which he was banished, and from which he had made so signal a conquest, that human justice from which he had snatched its victim, those judges, those executioners, all that force of the kings, which he, the meanest of the mean, had foiled with the force of God." And I love that paragraph. But that last part really gets my noggin jogging. The force of God. Is Hugo trying to say that God acts through Quasimodo?
That would be another interesting wrinkle to his character, because we have established, at least in my interpretation of the text, that Quasimodo is a Christ-like figure. There are several parallels between what has happened to him in this novel and what happened to Jesus Christ, according to the Christian Bible.
And is this necessarily fate? Quasimodo literally jumps down from the cathedral and snatches Esmeralda away from her fate. It is a choice that he has made to rescue her, versus Claude Frollo viewing himself as a passive victim, putting everything together. And with that heroic rescue, Book 8 comes to a close.
Speaking of Claude Frollo, he is missing all of this. Remember, he walked away from the execution. He's just running as fast as his skinny little legs can carry him. All the while, he is contemplating the uselessness of God. Pat, what do you make of that comment?
I see that as Frollo distancing himself from religion. He no longer sees God as useful to him because he's feeling these temptations and he's doing these horrible things. God cannot help him, and God does not interfere and prevent him from lusting after Esmeralda.
And what an interesting thing for Claude Frollo to reflect on right after Hugo wrote that Quasimodo foiled his plans with the force of God. So I don't think it's that God is useless. I think God is actively working against Claude Frollo. At least that's what Victor Hugo thinks. And of Claude Frollo, Hugo writes, "He willfully plunged into evil thoughts, and as he immersed himself in them, he felt a satanic laugh explode within him. He stirred up from the bottom of his heart all its hatred and its malice. Someone constituted as he was in becoming a priest made himself a demon." So Claude Frollo has gone full supervillain. He's just let go of any inclination that he is a good guy, plunging himself into villainy. And I want to unpack a little diction choice that Hugo made. He writes, "Someone constituted as he was in becoming a priest made himself a demon." Made himself is huge. Claude Frollo, victim complex as he has, would probably never say, "Oh, I made myself a demon." He would say something like, "Oh, the role of a demon was thrust upon me by fate." But not even the narrator can agree that Claude Frollo's present state was inflicted on him by destiny. And this is a fantastic contrast with Quasimodo. Hugo just said that Quasimodo is beautiful because of his actions, so too is Claude Frollo a demon for his. We have the most perfect beauty contrasted with the most grotesque ugliness, all made so because of both men's actions. But Claude Frollo doesn't regret this. Hugo writes, "He felt no regret about anything. He was ready to do it again. He would rather see her, Esmeralda, in the hands of the hangman than in the arms of the captain." Claude Frollo is a monster. And unfortunately, men like him still exist. Men with this, "if I can't have her, no one can" attitude. We hear so many stories, unfortunately, about women who were killed by their husbands, by their boyfriends, women who were killed just for saying, "No, thank you, I'm not interested," when a guy approached them at a bar and asked for their number. And eventually, after this little mental breakdown has passed, Hugo writes, "Eventually, recovering some degree of consciousness, Claude thought of seeking refuge in the tower near his trusty Quasimodo." Very ironic, considering what Quasimodo has just done.
And instead of finding comfort in Quasimodo, he decides to find comfort in the Bible. Unfortunately, it has the opposite effect. Frollo turns directly to the book of Job, chapter 4, verse 15, and he comes across this quote that really strikes fear into his heart. "And a spirit passed before my face, and I heard a small breath, and the hair of my flesh stood up." That reminds me of how Frollo was feeling about Esmeralda. She's the spirit haunting him and terrifying him and driving him mad. Job is a story about suffering. It's in our language. The patience of Job, the suffering of Job, all of that. It comes up over and over again in this story. Job is compared to the Philosopher's Stone that the alchemists are trying to synthesize. The Philosopher's Stone must be tested and martyred in order to become perfect, just like Job. But Claude Frollo is not at all like Job. I think the narrator's aware of this. In the story of Job, Job suffers by divine decree, as God attempts to prove a point with the accuser or the Satan, depending on your translation. But with Claude Frollo, his suffering comes entirely because of his own choices.
Chapter 2 follows Quasimodo and his new roommate, Esmeralda. And Victor Hugo begins by reminding us of the limitations of the law of sanctuary. And Hugo writes, "In this way, the sanctuary was a prison as much as any place that bore the name." And there's a great line in the Disney movie that paraphrases this, when Tony Jay goes, "You've chosen a magnificent prison, but it is a prison nonetheless."
Now, there's a cell in Notre Dame made to house convicts seeking sanctuary. This is where Quasimodo puts Esmeralda. Now, when she comes to, she's obviously a bit startled at seeing Quasimodo and not really knowing where she is, and she tries to ask, "Why did you save me?" Quasimodo doesn't understand her. He's deaf. And he's under the impression that she's asking him to go away, so he does. And after a while, Quasimodo comes back with clothes that the charitable women had left for her.
Again, I'm shocked by how quickly public opinion changes in this novel. 1 minute, the Parisians hate Esmeralda, and they think she's a witch, and they want her to be hanged, especially the women, Victor Hugo makes a point to mention. And then the next moment, they think, "Oh, she's pretty, we like her now. Let's give her clothes."
Putting Esmeralda in a nun's outfit can't be a coincidence, because that's what the outfit is that these women leave for her. A novice outfit, pure white. This is meant for someone who is pure, virginal, the exact opposite of how Esmeralda is viewed. Maybe it's a reflection of who she is internally, maybe it's a nod to the Virgin Mary, or maybe it's just a sign of how Quasimodo views her, because he views her as this kind, angelic being. And Quasimodo comes back, not only with the clothing, but with some food and a mattress. His own food and his own mattress. Now, I don't know if he went to Stop and Shop to get this, or if Claude Frollo's providing him with delicious baskets of bread and wine every day.
Well, at least for the mattress, I think he went to Sleepy's. I think it was the President's Day sale. Cue our non-American listeners scrambling to figure out what I meant.
Esmeralda is terrified, but she's slowly realizing, okay, it's not like I'm the prisoner of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. He's trying to be kind to me and provide for me. But what is going on? Then Quasimodo comes back again with a surprise. He has Jolly as well. I don't know if he stole her from Gringoire, or if he leaped down on the rope again to rescue Jolly the same way he did Esmeralda. And Esmeralda is thrilled to see Jolly. She's like, "Oh, I missed you. Don't think that I'm ungrateful." And Quasimodo's just looking at her and the goat while looking at how ugly he is. And he's just, "Oh, I'm not feeling so hot." And Esmeralda's not feeling so hot either. She's bursting into tears, so conflicted with emotion. And slowly but surely, Esmeralda and Quasimodo start interacting more.
A couple days go by, during which Esmeralda is just hanging out in Notre Dame, trying to figure out what the heck to do with herself. I mean, this is a little more comfortable and a little more stimulating than being a prisoner in a pitch-black cell underneath the Palace of Justice, but only marginally. She starts trying to interact with Quasimodo just to find something to do, I think, and these next few chapters really demonstrate how socially stunted Quasimodo has become from rarely leaving Notre Dame and only speaking with one person, Claude Frollo, throughout the vast majority of his life. I mean, at one point, Esmeralda wakes up in the morning and sees Quasimodo just standing there, and he says, "Oh, don't be afraid. I came to see you sleep." This is creepy. But how is he supposed to know this is creepy? He has zero social skills whatsoever.
Very Edward Cullen of him.
But Quasimodo doesn't have Robert Pattinson's good looks to support what he's doing. This just comes across as creepy, but how is he supposed to know that this is creepy? He has no social skills. Victor Hugo also notes that at some point, Esmeralda feels brave enough to take Quasimodo's arm, and he writes, "On feeling her touch, Quasimodo trembled in every limb." And I don't think this is some intense sexual reaction. I think this is an emotional reaction. Esmeralda is probably the first woman who has ever touched Quasimodo, at least in his adulthood. As the days go by, Esmeralda becomes a little more comfortable around Quasimodo, and eventually Quasimodo gets comfortable enough to open up to Esmeralda. He tells her that he's deaf, he encourages her to speak in hand gestures, which is how Claude Frollo communicates with him, and he says he'll try his best to read her lips. And this is how she is finally able to ask him, "Why did you save me?" And he says it's because he remembers when she gave him a drink of water while he was on the pillory, and he was simply repaying the favor. And he feels so indebted to Esmeralda for this single act of kindness she performed months ago that he says, "We have very high towers here. When you wish to be rid of me, tell me to throw myself from the top. You have but to say the word. No, a look would be enough." This is a great callback to Book 4, in which Hugo writes that only a look from Claude Frollo would be enough to get Quasimodo to throw himself off of the Tower of Notre Dame. That's a little extreme, but as we said when we were reviewing that episode, that's all Quasimodo has to live for. All he has to live for is Claude Frollo's satisfaction, until Esmeralda came along, and now he has two people who he would do absolutely anything in the world for. He doesn't see himself as an autonomous human being. He lives his life in service of the people he cares about. He probably tried to abduct Esmeralda because Claude Frollo asked him to do it, and he feels that he exists in the service of Claude Frollo. Now, because of Esmeralda's kindness, he also thinks he exists in service of her. And as we see demonstrated time and time again throughout these final few chapters of Book 9, he is willing to do absolutely anything just to make Esmeralda happy, even take his own life.
And as a token of that, Quasimodo presents Esmeralda with a small metal whistle and tells her that he is able to hear the high pitch. If ever she needs him, she just needs to blow, and he'll come. So Quasimodo places the whistle on the ground. He doesn't want to touch her.
Oh.
He is so concerned with not wanting to scare her or offend her, and as soon as Quasimodo leaves the whistle on the ground, he disappears.
So I guess Quasimodo can hear two sounds. He can hear very loud, very deep bells, and he can hear this very high-pitched whistle, like a dog. Patrick, where did he even get this whistle?
I don't know, a box of Fruit Loops? It's very convenient.
Now, Esmeralda is really bored in Notre Dame, so how does she pass the time? The same way she was passing the time when she was a free woman, by thinking of Phoebus. And Esmeralda convinces herself that the woman she saw Phoebus with on the balcony during the morning of her execution was his sister, because any other explanation, she thinks, would drive her absolutely insane. She cannot entertain the possibility that that was his fiancée or his wife. She needs to believe that Phoebus loves her, because that is her only reason for living. So just like Quasimodo lives for the love of his bells, and the love of Claude Frollo, and the love of Esmeralda, or at least their happiness and satisfaction, so too does Esmeralda live for Phoebus.
It's a lonely existence for her. All she has is Quasimodo. And it's very sad. Hugo talks about how Quasimodo is the sole bond, the sole connection that she had with men and with the living. But since it's Quasimodo, Hugo says that she is more outside of the world than he is. She understood not in the least the strange friend that chance had given her. Esmeralda wants to be grateful and get to know Quasimodo, but it's so hard for her. Hugo writes, She could not accustom herself to the poor bell ringer. He was too ugly.
And a lot of readers aren't fans of that sentence. They think Esmeralda is shallow because she can't properly express her gratitude to Quasimodo. She can't get over his appearance. But remember, listener, there was no internet during this time. There were no newspapers. There were no photographs. Your understanding of what a person could look like was limited to your immediate vicinity. Esmeralda, despite having traveled throughout Europe her entire life, has probably never seen a disfigured person before. We're living in the year of our Lord, 2026. I can just go on Google and search man with knocked knees, man with a hunched back, man with a wart over his eye, and I can look at thousands of pictures of people who look like that, and I can become desensitized to it. So when I meet someone who looks like that, I can maintain my composure, and I can get to know them for them. Esmeralda does not have that opportunity. It's like that legend we always hear about moviegoers who went to see Lon Chaney play the Phantom of the Opera during the silent film era, passing out in the theater when they saw the Phantom of the Opera's face. They had never seen something like that. They couldn't Google it. So I have a lot of empathy for Esmeralda in general, but I do have a lot of empathy for her in this moment. That said, I really, really, really would have liked to see her make a little more of an effort to get comfortable with Quasimodo. But how can she if Quasimodo keeps running away from her, keeps leaving her food and leaving her water, and leaving because he doesn't want to frighten her? You know, communication is a two-way street.
There are a few times where Quasimodo tries to reach out to Esmeralda, but they don't go very well. At one point, he sees Esmeralda caressing Jolly and says, "My problem is that I still look too much like a human. I would prefer to be entirely a beast, like that goat." Another time, Esmeralda is singing an old song that the Romani women taught her. And Quasimodo sees this, and even though he can't hear, he still wants to watch her sing. He falls to his knees and begs, "Oh, continue, I implore you, do not drive me away." Which is very awkward and strange for Esmeralda. Quasimodo leaves gifts for Esmeralda, including a cage of birds. And this part's really sad. One day, he approaches her and says, "I have something to say to you." A moment passes, and he shakes his head and runs away.
What do you think he was going to tell her?
I think he was finally working up the courage to say, "I like you." Maybe even "I love you."
Yeah, I think so too.
One day, Esmeralda is looking down at the square, and who does she see but the man of her literal dreams, Phoebus.
Her sun god, who totally isn't spoken for and was totally hanging out with his sister that one day. Ooh.
She calls out to Phoebus, weeping and imploring him to look at her, just to say a word, but nothing happens. Quasimodo witnesses all of this and puts two and two together and is distraught. He's not stupid. He can figure out that Esmeralda likes this beautiful man. He tears out a few tufts of hair and says, "Damnation! That is how one should look, then. One only has to be handsome on the outside." But, despite the fact that it kills Quasimodo to see Esmeralda calling for another man, he tugs at her sleeve and offers to bring him to her. Esmeralda lights up. "Yes, please, I will love you forever." I can't even imagine what's going through Quasimodo's heart hearing her say that. And even though Quasimodo is in tears, he leaves to go get Phoebus, just to make her happy.
This is the difference between Claude Frollo and Quasimodo. Claude Frollo's actions are only motivated by his own feelings and his own satisfaction. For example, he doesn't care whether Esmeralda lives or dies. He laughed when he believed that Esmeralda had been executed. The only thing he cares about is that he is freed, quote unquote, of his lust for her. On the other hand, Quasimodo's actions are motivated by Esmeralda's feelings. He doesn't care about his own pain. Seeing Esmeralda calling out for this beautiful man in gold spurs makes him cry, brings him to tear his hair out of his head. He doesn't care about that. He only cares that Esmeralda is happy, and he is willing to do whatever it takes to secure her happiness. And that, at least according to Bell Hook's definition, circling back to the book All About Love, that is what love is. It is going out of your way to ensure somebody's happiness, not acting solely in service of your own emotions.
Exactly. And Quasimodo is sacrificing his own emotions. He goes outside.
He does not like doing that.
And Quasimodo goes to find Phoebus, but unfortunately, by the time Quasimodo gets there, Phoebus is inside the Gondolier apartment and is there all day. Some kind of party's going on? Maybe an engagement party?
Shots, 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 everybody.
Well, they must have been taking shots for a while, because Quasimodo waits for like 12 hours until he finally sees Phoebus and Fleur-de-Lis appear on the balcony. Book 9 is just sad scene after sad scene for Quasimodo. He sees Phoebus and Fleur-de-Lis loving on each other and being all affectionate, and the narration is really tugs my heartstrings. Hugo writes, "That woman's love and all its pleasures would forever be passing before his eyes, but that he could never do anything but witness the felicity of others."
Aww.
It's even more torturous because he's seeing Phoebus, this handsome man that Esmeralda is so upset about, loving another woman. He knows that it would break Esmeralda's heart to see that Phoebus doesn't really love him.
And again, that just reinforces Bell Hook's definition of love. Quasimodo is in immense emotional pain in this moment. What is even more painful to him is imagining Esmeralda's sadness.
And after this little romantic tete-a-tete, Phoebus gets out of the apartment and tries mounting his horse, which Quasimodo uses as the opportunity to grab him and let him know, hey, a woman is waiting for you. A woman who loves you. Phoebus is annoyed by this. He's like, a rare imbecile to suppose that I am obliged to go to all the women who love me, or say they do.
He's got girls in every corner of Paris.
See, that's the Phoebus we know and hate. Quasimodo's not taking no for an answer. He is insisting, don't you know who this is? This is Esmeralda. 'Tis the woman you know. And the idea of Esmeralda being alive terrifies Phoebus. Because if you remember, listener, he and Fleur-de-Lis went back inside before the big rescue and sanctuary scene. Phoebus thinks that Esmeralda is dead, and this whole affair is over.
And then Victor Hugo makes a point to mention, Phoebus may not know Esmeralda is alive. Fleur-de-Lis knows Esmeralda is alive, but she hasn't told Phoebus. Clever girl. Phoebus is playing checkers, Fleur-de-Lis is playing 3D chess.
Is Phoebus even smart enough to play checkers?
He isn't even smart enough to keep $5 in his wallet for 2 minutes.
He's also not smart enough to get that Quasimodo is a real person who he has met before. He's spooked after hearing that Quasimodo's trying to bring him to this girl he thinks is dead. He's like, listen, do you come from the other world?
Yeah, are you a demon? Are you trying to bring me down to hell, which is probably where Esmeralda is?
And eventually Phoebus gets so fed up, he kicks Quasimodo in the chest and runs away. Quasimodo is obviously bitter and angry, and we know his strength. He could run after Phoebus and crush him under his thumb, but all he does is withhold his strength and say, how lucky you are that somebody loves you.
Oh. He absolutely could hurt Phoebus, but hurting Phoebus would also mean hurting Esmeralda, so he doesn't do it. And when he returns to the cathedral without Phoebus, Esmeralda is furious. She thinks he failed in his mission, and she sends him away. She doesn't want to look at Quasimodo anymore. And at no point does Quasimodo tell her, oh, he's not here because I saw him with another woman. He's not here because he refused to see you. No, because that would hurt Esmeralda, and he doesn't want to do that. So, from that day on, he respects Esmeralda's wishes and completely avoids her. But he continues to leave little clues that he loves her, and Victor Hugo really gets to flex how great he is at inserting symbols into his narrative. One morning, Esmeralda wakes up and she sees 2 vessels full of flowers in the chamber she sleeps in. One of them is a beautiful, ornate crystal vase that's cracked, so all the water has seeped out and the flowers inside are dying. The other one is an ugly, humble earthenware pot, but the flowers inside are thriving. Ha! I wonder what that metaphor is supposed to represent. And Esmeralda's not stupid. She knows what this is supposed to represent. And she takes those dead flowers out of that broken crystal vase, and she carries them around all day just to flex on Quasimodo. And again, permit me a moment to call out the readers of this book who think Esmeralda is shallow. I think she is, to an extent. You know, she's not attracted to Quasimodo at all. Her taste in men is what people who work in marketing are counting on. You know, she just wants a hot guy. She wants an Odell Beckham Jr. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting a 12 out of 10. That's fine. Patrick, you're a man. What do you think of that hot take?
I can't even think about that hot take. This is a really passive-aggressive gift from Quasimodo.
I know, just a little, oh, by the way, the guy you're in love with is a shallow loser who has nothing of substance to him except his pretty face. You know what? Esmeralda loves that pretty face. That's okay. I wish she had chosen a hot guy who was a little bit nicer and more faithful to her and was willing to give her what she wants, which is a traditional marriage and a traditional life. Listener, it's okay to like hot guys. That's fine. You don't need to apologize to anybody. That's okay.
You mentioned this before, but she is a teenage girl. She should be reading Tiger Beat magazine.
I know, she should be reading her Sold to One Direction fanfiction.
Sold to a handsome officer.
Chapter 5 begins, oh, by the way, Claude Frollo knows that Esmeralda is alive and Quasimodo saved her from being hanged. We don't get to see Claude Frollo initially hearing this information and reacting to it. I can only imagine it was catastrophic. Claude Frollo shuts himself in his cell for weeks, and the only person who tries to implore him to come out is Jeanne. But Claude does not answer the door, a la the do you wanna build a snowman scene from Frozen.
Imagine you're in the depths of despair, and someone keeps asking you for beer money.
I imagine that's what it's like to be the parent of a 20-something. As a 20-something myself, I can only speculate. So Claude Frollo is in his cell, in the depths of despair, riddled with these lustful, explicit thoughts of Esmeralda. One night, he just can't take it anymore. He leaves his chamber and goes into the greater cathedral to find her. Next chapter begins. Esmeralda wakes up, sees Claude Frollo standing over her. She screams as loud as she can, and he forces himself on her. And this scene is pretty hard to get through. It's pretty graphic. Esmeralda puts up a fight. She spits in his face. She scratches him. She hits him. He will not give in. He keeps trying to take advantage of her. And as one last Hail Mary attempt to save herself, she uses the whistle Quasimodo gave her. And it works. Quasimodo runs in with a dagger, holds it over Esmeralda's assailant, and then he sees that it's his adoptive father. And in this moment, Quasimodo is faced with an impossible choice, because struggling before him are the only 2 people he loves, both of whom Victor Hugo has established he would die for at a moment's notice. One is the man who raised him and gave him a home and a job and taught him to communicate multiple times and taught him to read. The other is the only woman who has ever shown him anything that might even resemble kindness. Stabbing Claude Frollo would mean siding with Esmeralda and betraying his father. Walking away would mean siding with Claude Frollo and betraying Esmeralda. It's like Sophie's Choice. It's impossible. How do you choose? Well, Quasimodo doesn't choose. He hands Frollo the dagger and says, "Kill me first and do what you please afterward." This way he absolves himself completely of having to choose between these people. This way he doesn't have to watch Esmeralda be assaulted, but he also doesn't have to kill his adoptive father, the man he feels he owes so much to. But before Claude Frollo can do anything, Esmeralda snatches the knife from Quasimodo's hand, holds it over Claude Frollo, and yells, "Come on! You don't dare approach now, coward!" And it works! Claude Frollo runs away. And this is why I will always be an Esmeralda apologist. Call her naive. Call her silly. Call her a shallow 16-year-old girl. You can make an argument for any of those. But you cannot make an argument that she's stupid. You can't make an argument that she's weak. You can't make an argument that she is a damsel in distress.
Oh, Esmeralda's so stupid. Why didn't she just run away with Frollo?
Are we smoking methamphetamines out of a turtle shell? Did we read the same book? Victor Hugo's Esmeralda is 16 years old. Listen, I understand if this incarnation of Esmeralda isn't your favorite. She's not my favorite either. But you can't make an argument that she's just some damsel in distress. Yes, of course, there are a couple scenes where men have to intervene and save her. But doesn't anybody need to be saved by a force greater than themselves at some point?
Claude Frollo certainly doesn't have the strength of a 16-year-old girl on her worst day. He cowers and leaves the room. Oh, but not before giving Quasimodo a good shove and a kick.
Oh, and because Quasimodo is Quasimodo, he just takes this abuse and doesn't retaliate.
And as Claude Frollo is descending the spiral staircase, he declares, "Nobody shall have her."
If I can't have her, no one can. I don't care about her happiness. I only care about mine. Meh.
Yeah, you're a real tough guy when you're not facing the person with a knife.
I know, 90 pounds soaking wet over that little black dress. Well, not to end this episode on a cliffhanger, but we're going to end this episode on a cliffhanger because Victor Hugo made that decision for us. Patrick, what are your overall thoughts on books 8 and 9 of The Hunchback of Notre Dame?
This is both my favorite section of the novel, my favorite section to reread, and my least favorite. I love almost all of the chapters here. Book 9 is a masterpiece. All of my favorite chapters are here. I love the scenes of Quasimodo and Esmeralda in the bell tower and throughout the cathedral. I love the scenes of Claude Frollo's delirium and madness. And in Book 8, I love a lot of the chapters as well. This is the height of the drama. The novel has been very slow-paced up to this point, but in these sections, we're really getting the dramatic novel that Hugo envisioned. This is drama. This is cinematic, even. However, I think the scenes of Esmeralda's trial drag a bit. You know, all of the talk about the crown piece turned into a dead leaf, and La Fallardelle ranting about her establishment not being a stinking hovel even though it is. I enjoyed talking about those sections with you, but whenever I reread this novel, I tend to skim over a lot of the trial stuff and the legal stuff. But that being said, I think each section of the novel has only gotten better and better. And I can promise you this, Leslie, that frantic pace is only going to be kept up throughout books 10 and 11, with perhaps a chapter or two that reverts almost to the pace of A Bird's Eye View of Paris.
These books have definitely gotten progressively more fun to discuss with you, Patrick. And listener, I hope they've gotten progressively more fun for you to listen to. And before we sign off here, Pat, It's time for our game. So, out of everyone and everything we discussed in this episode, who or what would you like to A, meet at the inn, B, turn to dust with, or C, throw off of Notre Dame?
Well, I would like to take Fleur-de-Lis to the inn, but strictly platonically. I know Fleur-de-Lis is very big on monogamy, so I'll respect that. I just want to know what is going on inside your head. There's much more than just the pretty rich girl that the surface shows.
Yes.
There's a scheming Machiavellian creature inside, and I'd like to get an impression of her. As for who I'm turning to dust with, I'm sure I've done him before. I've got to do it again. It's Quasimodo. He is so devoted to Esmeralda, and the depths of his love are absolutely extreme. I agree with the narrator. He is beautiful, but not just in the moment of saving Esmeralda. In general, his selflessness, his sacrifice, are admirable and beautiful. I feel so poorly for him, for all of the sorrow he goes through, and I just wish he and Esmeralda could have at least become friends, but it's such a strange and sad relationship that the two have. As for who I'm tossing off of Notre Dame, that's another no-brainer. It's going to be Claude Frollo, and we're tossing him down head first. I don't even care.
So that bald head will crack as soon as it hits the pavement.
We know everything he did. He's framing someone for murder, allowing her to suffer and be tortured and nearly killed. He's an attempted rapist, and we didn't mention it directly, but Esmeralda thinks that when she's being attacked during the night, it's by a vampire. She calls him a vampire. He is an inhuman ghoul, and the narrator admits it. When he thinks that Esmeralda is dead, he gives a satanic laugh. Inhuman. Claude Frollo is a living monster by his own choices, in contrast to Quasimodo, who is beautiful because of his choices. Now, Leslie, who's your Indus Notre Dame?
I think we're going to see a lot of overlap between our choices here, except for my first pick. I am going to meet accountability at the inn. I am going to meet the capacity to take responsibility for the consequences of one's choices at the inn. I miss it. I miss it very deeply. I miss it on a physical level. I need to have a really long rendezvous with accountability because we are sorely missing it in books 8 and 9. Mr. Claude Frollo, I am looking at you. As for who I'm turning to dust with, I had the same impulse, Patrick. Quasimodo. He is entirely selfless. He is a Christ-like figure, and Hugo makes a point to demonstrate that time and time again. He has a servant's heart, and he lives for the woman he loves. What else could you ask for in a life partner? We'll do something about his self-loathing and his suicidal ideations, but other than that, I think he's a good pick. I'm turning to dust with Quasimodo. As for who I'm throwing off of Notre Dame, I also picked Mr. Claude Frollo. Listen, Claude Frollo is a very interesting character. He is a very well-written character. He is so much fun to talk about. I could probably do an entire series of lectures about Claude Frollo and his potential motivations for the horrible, horrible choices he makes and the potential motivations behind his victim complex. That does not excuse the fact that he is one of the most selfish characters in all of fiction. And I think even people who really like this character and dedicate a lot of time to talking about and thinking about this character, they agree as well. He's not a good person, objectively. He is the opposite of Quasimodo in that he only acts in service of his own emotions, or often lack thereof. He really, really wants himself to be this stone figure, this emotionless husk. And he's bald. I'm not meeting a bald guy at the inn. I'm not turning to dust with a bald guy. You know, maybe if he started getting some sunlight and some exercise, maybe his hair would grow back. I don't know. There's probably some medical miracle that could be introduced into his life.
He's literally Dracula. They call him a vampire and a goblin. All right, Leslie. Are you ready We got one more episode, and we are finally done with Notre-Dame de Paris. Your 14-year-old self is finally going to be fulfilled.
Yeah! She is really looking forward to it, and Patrick, so am I. And listener, I hope you're looking forward to the conclusion of this epic narrative as well. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hunchcast. Ring that notification bell to be automatically updated when new episodes are released. For free bonus content, and to share your thoughts with us, follow us on Instagram, Tumblr, and TikTok at The Hunchcast. The Hunchcast of Notre Dame is a production of 1482 Media. All rights reserved.